So hello, everyone, and welcome to our SPA patient panel presented by the Spondylitis Association of America. I'm Jason Blackwell, Director of Brand Experience and Public Affairs for SAA. And today we are doing a debrief of the American College of Rheumatology's annual meeting, Convergence 21, where we'll be hopefully sharing some insights and information with you from some of the sessions, as well as two of the poster presentations on SPA and COVID-19. That was supported by research that was supported by SAA. So our panelists today are Charis Hill, writer, speaker, SPA activist who has attended more than 5 AACR annual meetings as a patient since being diagnosed with SPA in 2013. Charis has been involved in countless advocacy, legislative, medical, and scientific projects in the field of rheumatology and spondyloarthritis. Charis serves on SAA's advocacy committee, is also a SAA social media influencer, and regularly collaborates with SAA to disperse new information and expand SAA's reach. Richard Howard has 30 years of experience as a nonprofit professional, earned an MBA in nonprofit management. Richard was diagnosed with ankylosing spondylitis in 1990. He is immersed both personally and professionally in the spondyloarthritis community. He is the Chief Mission Advancement Officer for SAA and volunteers as a co-lead for the Los Angeles Spondylitis Education Support Group. He also serves on the board of directors of Walk as One and the patient board of the COVID-19 Global Rheumatology Alliance. Rich teaches yoga and also enjoys gardening, reading, and spending time with his family. So please feel free to post questions in the Q&A panel that we will address to our panelists. But as a reminder, both of our panelists today are SPA patients. They are not physicians and cannot provide recommendations on treatments or address specific questions related to individual symptoms or health concerns. So welcome, Richard and Charis.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Richard, why don't we start with you? Can you give us some background on how SAA supported the research for the poster presentations for the SPA and COVID-19?
Sure. Well, yeah, thank you again for the introduction. I'm so happy to be here with my Spondy community. It's an honor to share the poster information. And as you said, I'm not a physician, so these are my, I was on the research team for this, but we had actual physician researchers, clinician researchers, statisticians, infectious disease physicians on the research team. But they did ask me to create the abstract and the poster for AACR, so I presented that at AACR. So that's what I'm going to share with you today. But most of my comments today are just a patient perspective, and the best I could hope for is that people would walk away with something to talk about with their physicians and put it in perspective. But so how? So your question was, Jason, was how do SAA support this project, this particular project and posters? We did that. When the pandemic started becoming real for us, at least in our world in Los Angeles, I think we knew 2 things. One, that the spondylitis community is going to have questions. They're going to want to know, am I more at risk for catching it? Am I more at risk for having severe outcomes? Are the medications going to make it worse or better? I mean, just, question after, we're going to need a lot of information. And I also knew from early involvement with the Global Rheumatology Alliance that others in the rheumatology community were going to find some answers. We're going to be doing some research, but I knew they weren't going to focus on spondylitis because I shouldn't say I knew, I just suspected from history that the focus, a lot of the surveys were going to be heavy on other very important diseases in the rheumatology field, such as RA, lupus. There's so many other diseases, over 100 diseases in rheumatology. So we just jumped in fast and furious and got and pulled together this, I want to call them a dream team of researchers, as I mentioned some of the specialty on it. And I even found some funding who had no no influence on the type of questions or the research or analysis or anything else. They just provided some funding because they knew we wanted to do some research on spondylitis. And we got this survey up quick. And I want to say well done too. We had a lot of eyes on it, again, a lot of experienced eyes on it. And we worked with our sister organizations, in the global community. It was translated in 15 different languages. And that's where we got that's how we support it. So we supported, really, it's people who donate to SAA who supported this type of thing that we could just jump right in. So I hope I answered your question.
And it was indeed a massive, it did, thank you so much. And it was indeed a massive undertaking because it was not only here in the US, but as you mentioned, it did roll out on a much larger international level, which of course aided in us being able to get some really good information and intel. And thanks so much for members of our community who assisted us in conducting the research. And then I'll just jump into the poster. Talking about the poster? Okay, great. So we presented, SAA presented 2 posters at AACR. We're invited, you submit an abstract and you get invited to present a poster if they accept it. And a lot of really interesting work isn't accepted as a poster. So both of our posters that were submitted were accepted, which I think says a lot about the importance of our work and how rheumatologists, again, this is a conference for rheumatologists, how they thought that their community of rheumatologists would value these posters. It was based on a registry that SAA created. Many people on this call, on this Zoom, I'm sure, were participating in the survey, and so thank you for that. We had a link to the survey from our site. I think we had links to it from ESA, from our email, and even the social media probably. Yeah, and as I said, our sister organizations also promoted it. So let me start with a takeaway, because I've already talked a lot around it, but let me just give you the bottom line for me on this poster, and is that, so my main, and I'll fill in the details later in a minute, but basically we didn't find that that spondyloarthritis markedly affected the susceptibility or the severity of COVID-19. So it wasn't going to make you more likely to get COVID-19 or that you have worse outcomes of COVID, if you contracted COVID-19 than other people. And we also found on this poster, we presented that the medications commonly used to treat spondyloarthritis also didn't markedly affect the susceptibility of contracting COVID or the severity of COVID-19. So bottom line is that, compared to the general population, we're doing okay. There's no special warnings there if you live with spondylitis. So that, with that, I'll back up and give you some more detail. In fact, let me share the poster. That would be great. I think I'm sharing it. Am I sharing it? Is it blue? Yes, we're saying the COVID-19 is spondyloarthritis poster. Excellent. So the name of the abstract was the interplay between COVID-19 and spondyloarthritis or its treatments. So to our knowledge, this is by far the largest study on spondyloarthritis and COVID-19. We had 4,723 subjects living with spondylitis, and we also had 450 household members or household contracts who completed the survey. 3,289 people living with SPA and 245 household subjects provided longitudinal studies data. So not only did we send out a survey, but then we did follow up with people. So we asked them, to whatever, a month later, 6 weeks later, to come back on the survey and tell us what's changed. Did you contract COVID? How did you fare? So it's a longitudinal study. We launched it on April 10th, 2020. The survey was completed by people diagnosed with spondyloarthritis, including AS, and their household members. And the household members was another unique thing we did on this one, because so household members who don't have spondyloarthritis participated in the survey. And we did this unique feature of the study to help us analyze with some type of control. So
at the time thinking people living in the same household would also be exposed to COVID-19. And so how did those people fare with contracting it and also severity compared to the people living with spondyloarthritis? I mentioned this longitudinal, so people were asked to update their information. And there's when you do survey studies, there's something called an enrollment bias. I learned so much from the researchers. So enrollment bias is that you take part in the survey because if it's interesting, because maybe it's impactful for you. So maybe you have COVID, and so you want to fill out a survey or something, you know, or so if you do it longitudinal, if you do it over time, you have less of that type of bias because your motivation changes over time. And I mentioned it was global. 64.9, or roughly 70% of respondents are from the US. We had people from Canada. Actually, we had people from 72 other countries participate. 63% were female. Medium age for females was 49 and 54 for males. But we asked, in addition to demographic information, you know, age, gender, we also asked a lot of other types of questions, and those are in some of other papers that they published on this study. But we asked things about what was a diagnosis, what type of spondyloarthritis diagnosis was made by your medical doctor, medications, risk-taking as it relates to COVID-19, vaccination, hesitancy with vaccination, COVID-19 test results, what type of tests did they take, how severe COVID-19 was, and final outcomes from COVID. Was it this long COVID, or did it, you know, short duration? We even had backup contacts. They say this, but again, we went into it not knowing. We had backup contacts for in case people weren't responsive, so we could see if there was deaths from COVID. We asked about disease activities, and you know, the BASDI score. We asked about their HLA-B27 status and all kinds of information. I'll get some more data here. So 83.5% of respondents identified their disease as ankylosing spondylitis. Arthritis with IBD was 5.5%. Psoriatic arthritis was 8.5%. And then reactive, undifferentiated, and RX-bar were each 7%. So a little bit different than the poll we just took now, because I don't think we had any undifferentiated in the poll just now. 19.6% believed they were exposed to COVID-19, and 8.2%, or 384, believe they were infected with COVID. Of those, not everyone gets tested. Of those, 295 had a confirmatory positive test. So the conclusions on this study on outcomes was based on those confirmed disease. We also asked what type of medication influenced their susceptibility to COVID-19 or the severity. So we found that none of the treatments appeared to affect the likelihood to develop COVID, like I said, or the subjective rating of the severity of COVID-19. We found that some class of medications, such as anti-malarials and JAK inhibitors, were not commonly used by people responding to the survey. So the statistical meaning of those results could be confounded by the limited size of the database. In other words, there weren't enough people on those medications to draw a conclusion that it didn't lead to more severe COVID or not. And also dosage is another confounder, because I mean, there's only so much you can ask in a survey, and dosing over the course of time could change. Someone could go from one dose to another dose over the course of time. So that could be another thing that impacts severity, but we wouldn't be able to nail that down. I think I'll pause for some questions, but let me just say first, I'm really grateful for everyone who participated in the survey, and that this, as I said, this team of investigators was fantastic. NE3 fielded the survey, so they were fantastic to work with. And then, people who donate to SAA and AbbVie also sponsored, as I said, contributed, but didn't have any role in the study design, interpretation, or writing the results. So I'll talk about Dr. Rachel Higgins' poster, but is this a good place to pause? I feel like I've been talking for a long time.
Sure, let's take a pause. If there are any questions specific to this poster, we can certainly take those now. Please drop those into the Q&A panel, and we will pose that to Richard. Also like to mention again that SAA does have a comprehensive COVID-19 resource hub on our website. So please feel free to visit that. It has an abundance of articles that you can reference regarding COVID-19 and SPA as well.
I'll switch posters.
Okay. And Rich, do you want to give a quick mention to some of the researchers that were involved with it, with that poster?
Yeah, thank you. Let me do that. Yeah, on that poster, we had Dr. Michael Weissman, Hedley Hamilton from NE3. From staff, we had our CEO, Cassie Schaefer, our program director, Aline Islanian. We had Dr. John Revelle, Dr. Kevin Winthrop, Dr. Dongsuk Choi, Kimberly Olgi, Sarah Siegel, Emily Papasiru, Donna Grimes, and Dr. James Rosenbaum. I would consider probably our principal investigator.
One question is, as far as the survey itself for the COVID-19, are there any additional follow-ups that are going out related to it? I believe we've concluded it, so there's no additional follow-up to it, but correct me if I'm wrong, Rich.
Yeah, I want to say there was 5 different publications in peer-reviewed journals on the study. So I talked about 2 types of outcomes, but there's been other types of things that we found in the study that's already been published and peer-reviewed. I'm not aware of, you know what, I think there's one other pending publication coming out. So some analysis is still going on, but I don't think they were soliciting new people to participate in the survey.
Yeah, and as soon as we have clarification on being able to post these posters on our website, we will certainly have information on the publications where these are also available. So thank you for that, Rich.
All right, and can you see the next poster? Oh, well, this one won't take as long because I already gave you so much of the background. Can you see a green poster?
We do, thank you.
So the title is Most Patients with Spondylitis Accept COVID-19 Vaccination and Few Experience Disease Exacerbation After Immunization. So are people with spondylitis getting the vaccination? And did they have adverse events or did their disease flare? I think it was a burning question of a lot of people. And we thought the rheumatologists at AACR would want to know about it. We conducted, again, this web-based survey. There was 50, what we did was added questions. When the vaccinations came out, we added questions about them, designed to capture information about COVID, about a vaccine, acceptance, attitudes, did people modify medication use? And what are people hesitant and why are they hesitant to take a vaccination? So, I mean, it was possible that people's reaction, their disease could improve with the vaccine, or they could feel like the disease, flared. So we didn't know, so we were asking those questions. We started this one in April 2021. And I'll jump to the conclusions. We found that, I said in the title really, willingness to receive the COVID-19 vaccine was high and hesitancy was low among the people who filled out the survey. Nearly 80% of people who were vaccinated who participated in the survey indicated the vaccine had no effect on SPA symptoms, and only 1/3 modified their SPA treatments due to the vaccination. So this is where I find that, like, when you do a study, it's not, you can learn from the information, but it may not apply to you. So I had a reaction when I was ready to see that everybody had a reaction. But that's of course not the case, and that's why it's so important to do studies with people who know how to do studies. So I'll give you some details. Among the 1,292 vaccinated participants, 77% indicated that COVID vaccine had no effect on their SPA symptoms. 13% reported worsening symptoms after either first, second, or both vaccines, more on the second than the first. 9% indicated disease change in activity that they attributed to something else, maybe delaying their medication, maybe stress in their life, or something else that they attribute the change in disease activity. for better or worse disease activity. And then 66% did not modify their medication due to COVID-19 vaccination. When people did modify, the most popular medications that people did modify were biologics and NSAIDs and methotrexate. Now, as far as the people who aren't vaccinated, there was 194 participants in that. 31 indicated a fear of potential vaccine side effects as their main reason to the decline of vaccination. 20% stated it was their right to decline the vaccine if it wasn't mandated, and it shouldn't be mandated. Actually, I should be careful about the wording. The vaccine wasn't mandated. And then 19% indicated fear of worsening disease symptoms. So for me, the poster like this is a good thing to talk with your doctor about, because this 19% who didn't take the vaccine didn't take it because they were feared worse symptoms. And now here's a study that shows, well, for most people, it didn't create a worse disease symptoms. So now there's been some related studies. I'm kind of jumping off on AACR for a second, but there was a Canadian study with 220 patients. It was a clinical trial with controls on the mRNA, and they found the disease activity stayed the same and had no serious adverse events. So there's people who had similar to the healthy controls. So there's, there's another point, another study I looked at. Okay, SARS is in line with that. There's other studies too on COVID-19 that I think in RA I have it here, that showed some different type of results. But anyways, those were our posters. I really would love to hear from Charis too, so I'm going to stop sharing.
I did have a question that came in, perhaps if you're able to answer it. And this question comes from Audrey. Considering how many false positives that there may have been with the COVID test, do you think, or how do you think that may have affected the study results, if at all?
So if there's someone has a false positive COVID test, so they had COVID, and they actually didn't have COVID. Yeah, it's entirely possible. It's a better question for Dr. Winthrop. He was an infectious disease, and he was the one who looked at what questions ask about what type of test. And I don't think he included.
He did the
in our
Facebook
analysis,
live stream for us, yes.
I don't think he included the every type of test in the analysis and results. Great question.
Okay, that's definitely been one that we may take offline as well to see if we can find a good response for it. But thanks so much, Rich. That was really good information. If you have any other questions, please feel free to put them into the Q&A. This is also, before we move into the section with Charis, if you wouldn't mind taking some time to answer our second poll. I will bring that up.
I feel like we should have like that game show tune in the background.
I thought about it.
Did you? Oh no, we're scary how we think alike.
This is when I pick up my cats and show them off, right?
Oh, please feel free.
Out of
We
reach.
love pets and furry friends and family.
At our education support group in Los Angeles, we always have people who are newly diagnosed attend. Nice. We have people who were diagnosed long ago. We always have people brand new.
I'll take about 10 more seconds before I close the poll. Please, if you would like to participate in the poll, get your responses in. And see, we're roughly about 76% participation as far as our attendees today.
And some of them are not people living with the condition, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct. All right, then I will go ahead and close our second poll. So of our respondents, we have 97% of you who don't identify as being newly diagnosed, i.e. within the past few months. Thanks so much for taking time to participate in the poll. And now we are going to hear from, just let me double check something here as far as another question, perhaps about the posters. Oh, one final question for you then, Rich. Can you tell us what the general reception was to the posters at the conference? Was there any response, or how were they received by the clinicians in terms of the results?
Very kind, very thoughtful. A lot of our people from MSAB came by and looked at the poster. People were just appreciative. They said thank you for it and helpful information. Yeah. So, but yeah, no one was like, wait, you made a mistake here. or what about this?
Thank you, Rich. And now we are moving on to our next segment with Charis. So Charis, you've attended quite a few of these AACR annual meetings. What's it like to attend as a SPA patient?
Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Rich, for that great presentation. One of my goals is to present a poster too someday. So I was diagnosed with spondyloarthritis in 2013 and pretty much was catapulted into rheumatic professionalism, if you will, and attended my first ACR annual meeting in 2014, I believe, and I've only missed a couple since then. At the start, I didn't know ACR existed. So ACR is the American College of Rheumatology. Every year they have their medical conference where research is presented. And I didn't know this existed when I was first diagnosed. So my first time at ACR was overwhelming. The fact that there were thousands and thousands of people researching my class of disease, rheumatology, not necessarily spondylitis, felt really good. It gave me hope when I didn't really have much hope. And since then, I've gotten into the weeds a bit with really fancy scientific terminology. And I was telling Jason and Rich before this, how every year after ACR for a few days, my brain is just repeating all these terms and acronyms over and over again that the typical patient doesn't typically hear, but that I understand in my core now. I think I just want to pass along to those of you who live with spondylitis that there are people who are dedicating their lives to researching this disease and finding treatments, finding the cause of it, finding a cure someday. And that gives me a little, boost of hope every year. ACR, I mean, it's huge. It's bigger than, you have to be there to know how big it is. There are different study groups for different specialties. Like there's a study group about climate change and rheumatic disease. There's a study group about reproductive health. You name it, it's there. People who are picking highly specialized things to research and talk about. So ACR in 2020 and this year was virtual. So it was all virtual, nothing in person, which actually is good for me. And I think for a lot of people who attend who also live with rheumatic conditions, because we're not like shuffling across a whole convention hall to make it to another session. And so for me, the last 2 years have been awesome because I can attend more sessions. I can do it while I'm in bed. And it's just overall really great. So I'm actually not looking forward to returning to in person. But I know that the college is planning on having virtual components moving forward. Since 2013 or 2014, when I started attending, spondyloarthritis awareness has grown significantly. I don't think we're quite equal with our prevalence yet in terms of focus on spondylitis, but it feels good to go and everyone at least knows the disease and what it looks like, even if they're not specialists in the disease itself. And I'll say that I attend ACR both to gather information and then share it with all of you. But I also attend for the opposite reason, to share the patient experience with researchers. And I like to say that we're in the room, RHEUM, are in the room. So anyway, that's that's my perspective as a patient.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And yes, it is important for everyone on today's webinar to also understand that, yes, there are people who are actively studying the disease and giving it attention and focus. We're a long way from where we can be, but every year that there are additional topics that are brought into the forefront as part of the discussion helps to further and push the needle along. So speaking then about I'm sorry, go ahead, Rich.
Oh, I miss it in person. Yeah, I feel like I'm just as distracted on Zoom that I am, there. But yeah, the hallway conversation is just, you can't get those spontaneous meetings with people, and you find new speakers in firsthand, and you can ask people. I don't know. I just, you know what else I miss? Because when I went in person, I'd walk into a huge hall. Because you think you're alone when you're living with spondylitis sometimes. Like you feel like you're the only one to have it, and, and you walk in this huge hall and it's filled with physicians on spondyloarthritis, lecture after lecture, presentation after presentation. I always take a picture of that room and it wouldn't fit in the camera because it's just too big of a space. So
maybe that's something that ACR can actually do, where they have a visual representation of how massive the audience is, because that's kind of important too, as Charis is speaking about, to know that there are people who are actively involved. So are there any sessions then, Charis, or speakers that you were able to hear and see at this year's conference that you think are important to share for the community?
Yeah, I might, I'll touch on that, and I might run with it in a different direction. So I think overarchingly, like ACR is designed as like a really intense week plus of 10 hours of programming, if you will, and then if it's in person, there are events later on, happy hour, dinners. Online, it was just you wake up, you go to ACR for the whole day, and then do it all again the next day. But it begins with like an update about what's going on in rheumatology over the last year. There's a keynote, an opening session, and the opening session and the keynote is not necessarily a rheumatologist talking about rheumatology, but I approach medicine, medical things, rheumatology from a sociology perspective. That's what I studied in school. And so I was really interested in the opening session keynote by Dr. Seema Yasmin, who is a medical doctor, epidemiologist, who realized that her patients were getting like misinformation. So they were hearing myths, and she realized that they were getting those myths outside the doctor's office, and that in order to be an effective public health professional, outside the doctor's office, she needed to also become a journalist, so that she could dispel myths that were making it into the doctor's office and like contributing to people like not getting vaccinated, for example, because they think something is in the vaccine that's not. So I just thought that was really interesting for her to highlight the fact that medical issues aren't just about what's happening with a doctor or in a lab. It's also about what's happening in the public sphere. Basically, we need to see medicine at the table for all things like policy and systemic issues and societal progress. And that theme sort of repeated itself for me throughout the ACR as I attended a lot of sessions about diversity, inclusion, and equity in the field of rheumatology. So looking at healthcare disparities, who is more likely to have a greater burden of disease. We know people like Black people, other people of color, people who are transgender like me, other people who are LGBTQ, people who are impoverished, who may not have access to internet or good healthcare. So a lot of focus on that, and not just in treating someone in a doctor's office, but also who are we doing research on and how is that impacting our data? And then how are we applying that in the doctor's office? Like, are we applying data that was gathered from a white man population study and then applying that in practice to people who are not white men? And how is that impacting our knowledge and our care and our move forward in rheumatology? So I was really interested in a lot of those sessions. Dr. Yasmin also spoke about how the pandemic has exacerbated a lot of issues, existing issues, things that were already going on. So like mental health impact on people who are providing medical care, burnout, things like that, and how that disproportionately impacts like disabled people. So disabled medical students are getting burnt out before even becoming doctors because they don't have access to the things they need. So that's, I mean, I could talk about that all day. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about the COVID things to add on to what Richard was saying. So there were lots of posters at ACR about COVID this year and about vaccines, so vaccine hesitancy, the effect of vaccines. So one thing I noticed was people who, so white people were more likely to get vaccines in the rheumatology community. And there was less trust in vaccines by Black, Indigenous, and people of color. There are a variety of reasons why that probably is. So I think that speaks to a larger issue of researchers are becoming more aware of how their information that they're getting may be skewed based on where they're getting their data and who might be responding specific ways because of their setting as people. So because of identity, because of social location. Another thing about vaccination is that after rheumatic disease patients were vaccinated, they slept better. I slept better after I was fully vaccinated because, mentally I felt a little safer. So maybe some of you have had that same experience. And there were a lot of posters about telehealth, telemedicine, and our perspective as rheumatic patients about how we liked that, if it helped, if it impacted our treatment, if we want telehealth moving forward, if we wanted telehealth before COVID and it wasn't available. So looking at a lot of issues like that, healthcare access and living in the age of COVID. And I'll just rush through some things about spondyloarthritis that I thought were interesting that I picked up. you all have probably heard that the microbiome is, increasing in prominence in the spondylitis sphere. I didn't want to believe it for several years, but science doesn't lie, and the microbiome keeps coming up as, playing a big role in spondyloarthritis. And so I just encourage you to look at SAA's resources on that. SAA has a lot about the microbiome. I think James Rosenbaum talks a bit about it in a webinar. So, the microbiome may be part of what causes spondyloarthritis, but it certainly plays a role in the inflammation in the joints, is what we seem to be finding. I heard a lot about diagnostic delays and work to refer people sooner to a rheumatologist to delay those diagnoses. And I think a big thing is there was a focus by a couple presenters about how inflammation in spondyloarthritis impacts quality of life, whether there's radiographic or no radiographic damage. And I like to reframe that and say, inflammation causes damage, whether or not there's damage. And, I think more attention's being paid to non-radiographic spondylitis. So I will stop there. I think I rambled enough.
No, thank you so much. Yes, Rich.
Yeah, no, I agree. Interesting about the delay to diagnosis, that I did see some posters on there, and there seemed to be a lot of buzz about artificial intelligence and using machine learning to help diagnose people quicker. So, I mean, for me, I feel like there's some red flags there as far as how that information is used, although it's probably going to be used whether or not we're behind it or not. But if we can help use that machine learning to help diagnose people quicker, then yeah, it's going to improve outcomes. And then also you talked about microbiome. Yeah, Dr. Christy Kuhn had something, a term I picked up on, cell trafficking. So she said, I hope she doesn't mind me quoting her. She said in the hub, she said, cell trafficking is cool. And I think so. I can't understand much of the process there because it's so complicated not for a layperson, but how the cells get educated in the gut and what's the signal that pulls it into joints. It's just really interesting and something that's going to take off, I think.
Richard, do you think you could give a brief layperson definition of that? Because it took me a while to understand that it was not an offensive term. And I think the average layperson may immediately think it's referring to something that it's not.
I'm hesitant to do it because it was that was a new term to me, and that's really something probably someone should talk with their physician. Although there is on our, so one of the things that SA does is fund research, actual grants. We fund people doing research, and Dr. Kuhn has received funding from us, and the outcomes of her funding is on our research page of the website. So I had a physician help write the type of research. So I would defer there. Sorry about
definitely spondylitis.org/research. But yes, interesting term.
And then some things things that people live with the disease. I don't have to call us patients when I'm outside of ACRs. I never do the rest of the year. But so people live with the disease ask about different things. So there was a poster on fecal transplants, fecal microbiome, and there was so someone did a study on that and the placebo, and the take home I got out of it, again, I'm not a physician, so I might not be interpreting it, I might be missing things. But what I got out is that it's not such a great treatment. It's not something people who tried the fecal transplant did worse. And I think it was actually a PSA study also, so it may not be specific for us. But the other thing I picked up on some of the posters is there's new mechanisms, there's new things in the pipeline that are under investigation. So let's say, you're not finding treatments now, or maybe the treatments you have aren't preventing bone growth or the fusion. There's some new thoughts on how to address those things. There was a poster on CBD versus placebo. And they found it wasn't a significant benefit for pain. They looked at pain. Yeah.
There was actually a very deep dive into the botanical properties of CBD. It wasn't specific to spondyloarthritis, but it was a very deep dive into what CBD is, what THC is. And I realize not everyone listening is going to understand what I'm saying. CBD is cannabinoid. THC is tetrahydrocannabinol something. Sorry, I can't recall.
A very long term.
Right. These are both parts of the cannabis plant. It can also be extracted from hemp, which is a related plant. CBD is a fully legal substance. THC is not legal across the United States. And there was a very deep dive about how those chemicals are processed, what the plants are, which I thought was very interesting at a medical conference.
We also have from our last year's summit, Dr. Alvin Wells, who presented on a similar topic, but it's more focused towards SPA patients. So please feel free to check that out as a resource on our website. It's the spondylitis.org Global Summit from 2020, Dr. Alvin Wells.
So there was some posters. Do you mind if I ramble? Some of the highlights. There's some posters on, or some presentations on people withdrawing. So they're stable on medication, and they were seeing if they could withdraw, if they would flare, if they could taper, and if they went back on a medication, would it work as well as when they left it? Type of, if they needed to go back on. So those are interesting. I think that answers a lot of questions for. Well, we'll help to answer some questions for people. And I love the exercise ones too. So, because to me, it's like, of course, but it's nice to have it validated with some evidence. So there was a fantastic presentation of Dr. Kensler and Dr. Louie, who are both on that medical and scientific advisory board, and showed, they were saying disease activity goes down, function goes up, and pain goes down when you exercise. So, I mean, exercise, I don't know, for some of us, it's the hardest thing to do, but it seems to help. Yeah. Some studies were in different countries. I love that too. Like, so there was a study in Ireland on people with spondylitis. So there was quite a few. I don't know if you saw some, but I noticed a few on mental challenges with AS, or psychological challenges that come along with the diagnosis or associated with the diagnosis. So there was one in Ireland about undiagnosed depression with people with spondylitis in their clinic, and how it seems to be more than they expected. Anyways, I'll let you jump in. I have all these pages of all these little takeaways from AACR, and I still have like so much to go back to,
Yeah,
I'm nerded out.
There are hundreds and hundreds of posters and abstracts, and you have to pick what you look at really in real time, and unfortunately, virtual platform record sessions so that you can watch them later if you can't be there in real time. I think another big thing, which is sort of has been growing for a while, is the growing global shortage of rheumatologists. And we've known for a decade at least about the growing shortage of pediatric rheumatologists, but the adult rheumatologists are increasingly decreasing in number. In 2019, it was estimated that by 2030, we would need 100% additional adult rheumatologists than we currently have in the United States. And I'm sure that has changed because of COVID. So that's gonna impact care moving forward. It already is. Even in 2013, I had a pretty long wait to see my first rheumatologist, and I know that those wait times are increasing for people.
Well, thank you for mentioning that as well, Charis. I know it's some point, I think we had researched or looked at some other stat that said that, as you had mentioned, at least for pediatric rheumatologists, we have fewer than 350 of those who are practicing, which means that if you are a family member, caregiver, loved one of someone who's impacted by J-SPA or JIA, that you're literally traveling hours before you can reach a rheumatologist. And in fact, we're also going to have a shortage of rheumatologists for the adult population will also continue to pose challenges for the care of this community. So yes, thank you for definitely highlighting that as well.
On the upside, not of that
Thank
exactly,
you,
but at ACR, we also present our Early Career Investigator Awards. So, you know, we ask for people who we encourage, we recognize and award publicly people who are early in their career, so young investigators, for doing work on research on spondyloarthritis, and we give them an award and we make a public presentation there. And we had we usually choose one a year. We had more than one fantastic applicants. We awarded 2 people the ECI award this year. And yeah, so that's part of the network.
Can you tell us their names? I know we presented the awards.
Yeah, it's Mark Wang and Ruth Napier. And it escapes me where they're at. I want to say Mark is in Texas and Ruth is, I want to say, in the Bay Area, but
yes,
I should know.
So we'll have that going out on their social channels and on the website as well. I do want to get in one additional question here that popped up. If you're able to answer it, if not, that's okay as well. But was there any discussion at ACR about autoantibodies or SPA actually increasing vaccine antibodies and increasing their duration in the body that either of you were aware of?
I don't recall specifically related to vaccines. I do remember seeing some posters that I didn't look at related to autoantibodies, but that was not vaccine specific. What I can say is that it is recommended that all people with rheumatic diseases get vaccinated against COVID, and that the vaccines are effective.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can't speak to ACR stuff, but I can speak
Specifically.
to primary vaccine series and whatnot, but not autoantibodies.
Okay, great. So it seems like there was a lot of good information that came out of this year's conference, and obviously thinking about next year's conference as well. How do you foresee being able to filter all of this information? So I know you've got plenty of notes. Maybe we can actually take some of those and turn them into hacks like we've done for Spondies, and perhaps share that with the community as well, because it seems like there's so much good information. Any final questions from today's participants for our panelists? I'm sorry, Rich.
Oh, I was going to say, as you know, again, putting my person living with spondylitis hat on, it could be a little overwhelming going to ACR too, because you're like, you can see a study about hospitalization, at a higher rate than general population, or death, mortality, or how obesity affects the disease, or it's just it's like thing after it's a serious disease, and you can't really go to an ACR without seeing the how serious this disease is.
And at the same time, it's important to research that and share that with the community, that it's a wide-ranging disease with different impacts for every person.
I mentioned, but there was a study out of Ireland about unemployment. I'm like, oh my gosh, like what part of your life isn't affected by spondylitis,
Well, thank you both so much. I know that we're coming up on the conclusion of our time here. If there are any additional questions, feel free to send them my way. We will try to get responses for them. You can reach me at jason.blackwell@spondylitis.org. If you have any additional questions or looking for additional resources on anything related to SPA, also feel free to check out our resources on spondylitis.org. So again, I'd like to thank both of our panelists for taking time out of their day to share with us their insights and their experiences at the AACR Convergence 21 conference. And hopefully we can gather again next year around this time to do another debrief and talk about even more information and insights that have come out of those meetings. So thank you all again for your time. Charis and Richard, we wish you a good afternoon.